She smiled, whispered promises, and in a single moment, shattered everything you thought you knew about love. What if I told you that her betrayal isn't the end of your story, but the beginning of the man you were always meant to become? The moment of betrayal is not just an emotional shock, it is a psychological earthquake that shakes the very ground beneath your identity. When someone you trusted, loved, or believed in turns against you or chooses someone else, a part of your inner world collapses. It hits with a force that is impossible to anticipate. In that instant, you are confronted with the undeniable truth that the version of yourself you once carried, your confidence, your assumptions, your expectations, was built on something far more fragile than you realized. Betrayal doesn't simply hurt, it exposes. It reveals how much you depended on validation, how deeply you tied your sense of worth to another person's presence or approval. And while that realization cuts deeply, it is also the very thing that begins to wake you up. This shattering moment is often the first real test of a man's emotional structure. Many men go through life believing they are strong simply because they have never been tested where it truly matters, the heart. But betrayal forces you into a confrontation with yourself that you can't run from. Everything you thought you understood about loyalty, love, and your own resilience is challenged. You suddenly see parts of yourself you ignored, your softness, your blind trust, your attachment, your hidden insecurities. It's raw, brutal, and overwhelming, but it's also incredibly honest. And that honesty, as painful as it is, becomes the seed of transformation. The collapse of your old identity creates space for a new one to be built, one grounded not in fantasy or dependence, but in clarity, strength, and self-respect. The shattering moment becomes the beginning of becoming someone harder to break. Pain from betrayal doesn't arrive quietly. It hits like a force that takes your breath away, and in those first moments, it feels like something has been violently ripped out of you. Most men try to fight it, numb it, or pretend it doesn't exist, believing that acknowledging pain somehow makes them weak. But what they don't realize is that this emotional shock contains tremendous power if redirected the right way. Pain is energy, and energy can destroy you or rebuild you depending on how you choose to use it. When betrayal strikes, the emotional intensity is so strong that it can either collapse you inward or ignite something inside you that you never knew existed. This is the point where many men discover a version of themselves they didn't know they were capable of becoming. The anger, confusion, sadness, and disappointment blend into a raw fuel that pushes you to question everything: your habits, your priorities, your relationships, and even the way you've been carrying yourself. Instead of clinging to the heartbreak, you begin to feel something shift, a desire to rise, to harden, to prove to yourself that this pain won't define you. That transformation is not born from comfort, it is born from suffering. When you channel pain into growth rather than self-destruction, you begin to move with a different kind of intention. This redirection of pain turns emotional chaos into clarity. You recognize that the person who hurt you no longer deserves control over your life. The energy once tied to them becomes fuel for discipline, ambition, and self-improvement. Pain becomes the spark for a new chapter, one where you stop waiting for someone else to validate your worth and start building a life that reflects the strength rising inside you. Betrayal has a unique way of dragging your hidden weaknesses into the light, and it does so without mercy. When everything falls apart, you can no longer hide behind excuses, pride, or the illusion that you had everything under control. You're forced to face the parts of yourself you ignored, the parts that made you vulnerable in ways you didn't want to admit. Maybe you gave too much. Maybe you tolerated disrespect because you were afraid of losing someone. Maybe you mistook attachment for love or validation for connection. These truths are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. You begin to see how your desire to be accepted or appreciated made you blind to red flags you should have addressed. The betrayal becomes a mirror, and what it reflects is not just them, it's you. This confrontation with weakness is often the most painful stage of growth, because it requires brutal honesty. You realize that your softness, your eagerness to please, or your emotional dependency didn't protect you, they exposed you. And in that raw moment of clarity, you see the difference between wanting love and needing it. You start to understand how much of your identity was tied to another person's presence, and how that dependency created openings for disappointment and manipulation. But acknowledging weakness is not the same as being weak. It's the beginning of strength. Once you see your own shortcomings, you're no longer controlled by them. You begin to rebuild yourself from the inside out. You learn to set boundaries, to value yourself without someone else's approval, and to strengthen the parts of you that were once fragile. Betrayal forces a man to grow up not in age, but in self-awareness. You stop being who you were and start becoming who you needed to be all along. Rebuilding your masculine core begins the moment you decide that your past will not define the man you are becoming. After betrayal has stripped away illusions and exposed the weaknesses you tried to overlook, you are left with a rare opportunity, one that few men recognize as a blessing in disguise. This is the stage where you start constructing yourself with intention, not emotion. You stop living reactively and begin shaping your life based on standards, boundaries, and principles. It is a process that demands discipline, not bitterness, strength, not hardness, clarity, not coldness. The pain you went through becomes the foundation for a new version of yourself, one built to withstand life rather than collapse under it. Rebuilding the masculine core requires you to reclaim your sense of autonomy. You learn that your emotions, while valid, cannot be allowed to control your direction. You establish boundaries not as walls to keep people out, but as gates that protect your self-respect. You realize that being a man is not about suppressing your feelings, but about guiding them with purpose. Discipline naturally becomes a central part of your transformation. You start valuing consistency over comfort, commitment over impulse, and strength over validation. Every routine you build, whether it's physical training, financial growth, learning, or personal development, grounds you deeper into your identity. As you rebuild, you also redefine what you expect from yourself and others. You no longer allow disrespect, manipulation, or emotional games to pass unnoticed. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet confidence that doesn't need loudness or aggression to be felt. The masculine core you build in this phase is not about becoming harder, it's about becoming solid. Betrayal pushed you into this reconstruction, but the man emerging from it is your own creation. Emotional self-reliance is one of the most powerful traits a man can develop, yet it is often the one men ignore until life forces it upon them. Betrayal becomes the moment that strips away the belief that another person can be the source of your happiness, your confidence, or your peace. When the person you depended on emotionally is suddenly gone or reveals disloyalty, the emptiness you feel is not just heartbreak, it is the realization that you outsourced your sense of worth. That realization is painful, but it is also the starting point for reclaiming control over your emotional life. You begin to understand that relying on someone else to complete you was the very thing that left you vulnerable. As you process the hurt, something shifts inside you. You stop searching for comfort in others and start looking inward instead. You learn to sit with your emotions, to understand them rather than run from them. You begin to recognize which feelings are genuine and which are simply reactions to past wounds or unmet expectations. Emotional self-reliance doesn't mean shutting down or becoming numb. It means not allowing your emotional state to be determined by another person's decisions or behavior. It is the ability to feel deeply without losing yourself in the process. With each day, you become more grounded. You start to enjoy your own company, finding clarity in solitude and confidence in independence. You begin to realize that you can survive, rebuild, and thrive without anyone holding your hand. This new stability changes the way you move through the world. You become less reactive, more composed, and harder to manipulate. You're no longer swayed by temporary affection or afraid of losing someone, because you've learned that your emotional foundation is yours alone. Emotional self-reliance becomes the quiet strength that shapes the man you're becoming. Rewiring your identity begins the moment you stop trying to be the man someone else wanted and start becoming the man you were meant to be. Betrayal forces this shift because it shows you, with painful clarity, that living according to someone else's expectations is a trap. Maybe you tried to be kinder, softer, more accommodating, more patient, or more forgiving, thinking it would earn commitment, loyalty, or appreciation. But instead, you learned the hard way that molding yourself to fit another person's desires only disconnects you from your true self. This realization is uncomfortable at first, because it requires you to admit that you abandoned your own identity to keep someone else close. As you begin rewiring, your mind starts questioning everything you once accepted without hesitation. You examine the beliefs you carried about love, masculinity, relationships, and your own worth. You realize that much of who you were was shaped by fear of being alone, of failing, of not being enough. Betrayal exposes that fear and forces you to confront it head-on. And in that confrontation, you finally begin to reclaim your personal power. You start asking yourself who you want to be independent of anyone's influence. You explore new values, new standards, and new definitions of strength and self-respect. Rewiring your identity is not an overnight process. It's a gradual unlearning of unhealthy patterns and a rebuilding of a more solid internal structure. You stop living as the fragmented version of yourself driven by approval, and you begin to operate from a place of intention and authenticity. You become more confident, more self-assured, and more aligned with your true nature. The man you become after this transformation is stronger, clearer, and far more grounded, no longer shaped by betrayal, but shaped by choice. Betrayal has a way of forcing you to re-evaluate what truly matters in your life, and one of the biggest shifts comes when you stop chasing temporary pleasures and begin pursuing long-term purpose. Before the hurt, you may have been caught in patterns of comfort, seeking affection, validation, and emotional security from someone else. You might have prioritized moments of pleasure or closeness over your own goals, neglecting your ambition in the name of love or attention. But once betrayal shatters that illusion, you are confronted with a truth that is both painful and liberating: you were living without a deeper mission. And when the emotional noise fades, what rises in its place is a hunger for something greater than fleeting feelings. This is when purpose begins to take center stage. You start thinking about your future not as a shared fantasy with someone else, but as a personal mission that belongs solely to you. You begin to understand that real fulfillment doesn't come from being chosen by someone, it comes from choosing to build a life that reflects your strength, discipline, and direction. Instead of spending energy on trying to hold on to a relationship that wasn't meant for you, you redirect that energy into improving your body, your mind, your finances, your skills, and your overall path. Pleasure becomes secondary to progress. You begin waking up with a sense of clarity, driven by the desire to become a man capable of navigating the world with intention. The distractions that once held power over you start losing their grip, because your mind is now anchored in growth. Betrayal, ironically, pushes you toward becoming more focused, more driven, and more aligned with your true calling. Purpose becomes the force that steadies you, strengthens you, and transforms you into someone who no longer depends on anyone to feel complete. Detachment is not about caring less, it's about caring with balance and strength instead of desperation. After experiencing betrayal, you begin to understand the importance of loving without losing yourself. You realize that attachment built on fear, insecurity, or dependency only leads to disappointment. So you start learning how to hold space for people in your life without allowing them to disrupt your inner stability. This is the shift from emotional chaos to emotional discipline. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding with clarity. You stop chasing, stop begging, stop pleasing just to be accepted. Detachment becomes the tool that protects your peace, and with it comes a strength that cannot be easily shaken. As you grow, you develop a new kind of awareness. You see people more clearly, not through the lens of your desires, but through their actions and consistency. You allow them to show who they truly are instead of projecting your hopes onto them. This selective way of loving isn't cold, it's wise. You no longer feel the need to pour everything into someone too quickly, because you understand that real connection requires time, effort, and mutual respect. You learn to observe before investing, to listen before trusting, and to walk away when something threatens your self-respect. This detachment doesn't make you distant, it makes you stronger. You can love deeply without clinging. You can give without losing your boundaries. You can commit without sacrificing your identity. The emotional strength that comes from this mindset makes you harder to manipulate, harder to deceive, and harder to break. By becoming selective with your heart, you elevate your standards and protect the man you have worked so hard to rebuild. Detachment becomes a quiet form of power, allowing you to move through the world with confidence, control, and unshakable self-worth. Becoming the man you were meant to be is not the result of comfort, praise, or effortless happiness. It is forged through hardship, loss, and the painful clarity that betrayal provides. When everything you trusted collapses, you are forced to rebuild from the ground up, and in that process, you discover parts of yourself that were hidden behind attachment, fear, or emotional dependency. The version of you that rises after betrayal is not born out of bitterness but out of awakening. You become more self-aware, more disciplined, more selective, and more rooted in purpose. You realize that the pain was not meant to destroy you, it was meant to reveal the strength you never acknowledged. As you grow through this transformation, your relationship with life changes. You stop trying to fit into someone else's expectations and start building a path that aligns with your values. You carry yourself with a confidence that doesn't need validation, a calmness that isn't easily shaken, and a focus that isn't distracted by fleeting emotions. You begin to see how betrayal was a turning point, not an ending. It forced you to let go of the weaker version of yourself, the one who tolerated disrespect, ignored red flags, and relied on someone else for emotional stability. That version had to break so a stronger one could emerge. The man you become after this journey is wiser, more grounded, and more intentional. You understand love without dependency, strength without aggression, and confidence without arrogance. You no longer fear losing people because you trust yourself to stand alone if necessary. This is the transformation betrayal gives you, the chance to rise, rebuild, and redefine yourself. It turns pain into power and loss into evolution, shaping you into the man you needed to be all along.